Welcome, welcome, welcome to Kincardine United Church's presentation of Around the World Again. We had such positive feedback from our presentation last year that we've decided to do it again.
John and I love traveling and we love working with other people to put the presentations together. We still feel so fortunate to have so many people in our congregation who are willing to spend the time to prepare a presentation and share their stories.
This presentation is being recorded and will be available on the church YouTube channel and on the website for you to share and review at a later date, similar to last year's presentation.
So we hope you enjoy the next hour of presentations as much as we enjoyed putting it together.
Without further ado, we give you Gord.
Hi, welcome to this evening where we will travel around the world in 60 minutes. Again, at least I expect it will be close to an hour together. I want to thank John and Mary Phillips for making this all happen, whether through recruiting people to share their travel pictures, making digital recordings with the participants, or hosting all of us tonight, when many of us are stuck at home, mostly, except for trips to grocery shop or to pick up restaurant takeout. This exploration of new vistas is just the tonic for the February blahs. I also want to thank everyone who participated in this evening's event. It makes a huge difference to have so many sharing so much. The purpose of this evening, beyond providing a time of escape from our everyday, is to invite folks to support the ministry of Kincardine United Church. If you decide you wish to make an extra donation to the church, the best way is to go to our website and look for the donate icons on the left side panel of our webpage. Just mark your donation as Around the World. Let's pause for a brief moment of prayer. Loving God, your creation reveals the wonder and the mystery through the connections of all life. May our digital travels this evening foster within us the same wonder and awe at your beauty blossoming all around us. Amen. So, without any further verbiage on my part, let's travel through image and story.
Good evening. Our first trip this evening is to the Holy Land, guided by Richard Hall as he and Barb retrace the steps of Moses to Mount Sinai. Richard and Barb are relatively new to our congregation and are willing to commute from Wingham to see us here in Kincardine.
In 2006 and 2008, Barb and I climbed Mount Sinai, where Moses received the Ten Commandments from God. The 2-hour drive from Sharm el-Sheikh is filled with desolate beauty, and at the foot of Mount Sinai is St. Catherine's, the world's oldest Christian monastery, dating from 330 AD, but monks have lived here since the 2nd century. We stayed at the monastery's guest house, just outside the walls of the monastery, where we had modest but comfortable lodging, great cuisine and community, and a spectacular view of the Holy Mountain. After lunch, we toured the monastery, named after St. Catherine of Alexandria, who was martyred in 305 and buried at Sinai. Valued by the Prophet Muhammad, he gave the monastery a special charter of protection, sealed with his own handprint. The formidable walls deter invaders, and the only entry used to be over the wall by rope basket, but since 1862, this entrance was constructed. 20 Greek Orthodox monks make up the St. Catherine's community, and they live in cells scattered throughout the monastery. This one on the north wall is the oldest. When they die, their bones are eventually moved to the charnel house. The Chapel of the Life-Giving Spring is built over the well where Moses first met his future wife Zipporah. But the oldest part of the monastery is the Chapel of the Burning Bush, where Moses first encountered God. Outsiders are rarely permitted to visit or even see the tiny chapel. The largest place of worship is the Transfiguration Basilica, and beside it a mosque for Muslims, who also revere Moses. Here's the sanctuary of the basilica. and its famous Transfiguration mosaic in the Asp, and the final resting place of St. Catherine of Alexandria. St. Catherine's Monastery is best known to many as having the world's oldest continually operating library. Father Justin, St. Catherine's librarian, gave us a personal tour. The library is second only to the Vatican Library in its collection of ancient books and manuscripts. Its greatest treasure used to be the Codex Sinaiticus, the oldest copy of the Bible with both the Old and New Testaments. However, a scholar borrowed it in 1859 and never returned it, and now it's displayed in the British Museum. They're still trying to get it back. This is the most valuable treasure still at the library, the Codex Syriacus, the oldest copy of the four Gospels. Father Justin is digitizing the whole library with a spectral imaging system so scholars can remotely access it from anywhere in the world. The monastery also has the world's largest collection of ancient icons, dating back to the 5th century. This is the oldest icon of Jesus Christ, and the oldest known icon of the Apostle Peter, and an ancient icon of Moses. Icons of Moses are very rare and produced only at Mount Sinai. We went to bed early that night to prepare for our ascent of Mount Sinai to greet the dawn. Wake-up call was 2 in the morning, bundled warmly for the night climb. The first 2/3 of the trip is on camel, about 2.5 hours. Leaving the camels behind near the top, we rest in one of the Bedouin huts before the final ascent. One enterprising Bedouin posted this sign. The final climb is about 45 minutes on what is known as the Steps of Repentance. Arriving at the top about 15 minutes early, we await the dawn, and when it comes, it's an exhilarating experience. On the peak of the holy mountain is the Trinity Chapel, also known as the Chapel of God in the Highest, and beside it, a mosque. Here's Barb and I on top of Mount Sinai. And one more view of the summit. Before we started the descent, which takes about 1.5 hours on foot. The temperature gets warmer with the sun's rays and as we descend in altitude. Partway down the mountain, here's looking back at the summit. Hard to believe we were up there. The Bedouin are stationed along the way with their camels, but walking downhill all the way is not difficult. Here's a Bedouin woman with her donkey for hire. We now see St. Catherine's Monastery in the distance, our trip almost over. And this aerial photo points to where we were on the summit, beside the Trinity Chapel. And one final view of Mount Sinai from St. Catherine's Monastery. Thanks for watching.
Well, thank you very much for climbing Mount Sinai with us. We wanted to bring back the 10 Commandments as a souvenir, but the Egyptian authorities just wouldn't allow it. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the couple that have put together the Around the World series and to whom we owe much thanks, John and Mary Phillips. They're going to be telling us about their visit to Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Now at the very end of their presentation, you want to watch for a very touching experience which they relate, which was no small feat, although perhaps somewhat smaller in the end. So without further ado, let's have the Phillips family. Give me John, give me Mary.
In the winter of 2017, John and I spent 6 weeks traveling around Vietnam and Cambodia. Everything about the area was fantastic, but the attraction that stood out most were the temples of Angkor Wat and the surrounding areas. This bridge is one of the entrances to Angkor Wat. It was built in the 12th century and at the time was the largest stone bridge of its kind in the world. Angkor Wat is located in Cambodia, 4 miles from Siem Reap, and is also called the City of the God Kings. The temples in the area are the largest religious monuments in the world. It was designated a World Heritage Site in 1992. There are over 1,000 temples in the area, but not all have been restored. We visited 5. Angkor Wat is the biggest and most widely known. These are all sacred sites, so knees and shoulders had to be covered. Angkor Wat was built in the early 12th century as a Hindu temple for god Vishnu, so it's almost 900 years old. In the 14th century, it was converted into a Buddhist temple. It was abandoned in the 15th century and mostly forgotten until 1890, when a French naturalist accidentally discovered the remains. Researchers have determined that there were intense monsoon rains that followed a long drought in the area in the 14th century. They think the rains caused the widespread damage to the infrastructure, so it was abandoned. The inscriptions and artwork in the temples are amazing. The Tapron Temple was featured in Lara Croft's Tomb Raider. It has not been restored the way that Angkor Wat has been. It has trees towering up through the buildings, with the tree roots engulfing lots of the buildings. It's like the trees are a part of the buildings. The Bayonne Temple has a sea of smiling stone faces. No matter where you walk, you will always be able to see at least 12 stone heads. Angkor Wat was the capital city with a population of over 1 million people. The south entry to the city was flanked by giant statues on both sides of the gate. Gods are in a line on one side of the road, and on the other side are devils. This is called the Elephant's Terrace. It was used by the king as a platform from which to view his victorious returning army. It was attached to the palace, but today the terrace is the only remaining part of the palace. The Tao Kao Temple is a temple mountain built entirely of sandstone. It has 5 sanctuary towers, which are built in the uppermost level of a 5-tier pyramid consisting of overlapping terraces. It's a step pyramid. It was a symbolic depiction of Mount Meru. We were allowed to climb up steep steps to enter the temple, then we could wander through it. It was like a massive living area high above the ground. The last temple we visited is nicknamed the Pink Temple. Inscriptions found at the site state that the building was started on April 22nd, 967 AD. This is also called a ladies' temple due to the color and the fact that it has ornamental decoration on virtually every available surface. The restoration of the temples take decades, and it has been described as the world's largest puzzle. They said it has gotten easier now due to computers. I can't imagine what it must have been like when they first started the restorations. After a long day of visiting the temples, we went to a fish spa. The fish exfoliate the feet by nibbling on them. It was definitely a weird experience.
Hi there. We're having our feet cleaned by the fish in Siem Reap. And it's very ticklish.
This was definitely a trip of a lifetime, and I'd recommend everybody add it to their bucket list. Thanks. John and I loved our trip to Cambodia and Vietnam, and the temples around Angkor Wat were simply spectacular.
It was a trend to do matchy-matchy when we were there, hence the banana outfits.
We're hoping to be back in that area right now touring Thailand, but unfortunately that will have to wait for another year.
Next, you get to experience another part of Asia that is equally exotic. Marion and Howard Brown now share their trip to China.
In 2012, Howie and I made a once-in-a-lifetime trip to China. We landed in Beijing, the capital city, population 21 million. It was interesting the first day to see seniors dancing in the park, ballroom and line dancing, playing mahjong, and painting with water on the concrete. Then came the Forbidden City, where the emperor kept his concubines in the furthest building away. We moved on to famous Tiananmen Square, site of the student uprising in 1989. The square is heavily guarded. At one point, a boy climbed over a chain fence, and we were told his parents would be in big trouble. From there, on bus and plane, our tour began. A fascinating bus trip was to the Great Wall. The construction of the wall began in 7th century BC and was completed in 1644. It was amazing to see the length and mountainous terrain on which the wall was built. We visited the city of Xi'an with plenty of mist that we call smog. At Xi'an, we traveled to the site of the terracotta warriors. They are housed in 3 enormous buildings. The clay warriors were discovered in 1974 by a farmer drilling for a well. We snapped his picture, much to his displeasure. We learned that the emperor ordered the warriors to be made to protect him upon his death. Our next stop was a boat trip up the Yangtze River and the 3 gorges. It was amazing to hear how many ancient villages were displaced due to the building of the 3 Gorges Dam, which is 3 miles long. We took a side trip in an ancient boat up one of the gorges. Our guide referred to a huge bridge as the Bridge to Nowhere, since the roads were not yet built. Along the tops of the gorge's walls were the graves of mountain people, coffins in caves, or literally placed on a huge rock called hanging coffins. We continued on our river cruise towards Chongqing. All along the Yangtze were huge apartments and factories that went on for miles. We toured a silk factory and helped stretch the silk for a blanket. Chongqing is the largest city in area, 83,000 square kilometers, and population 31 million. We did manage to catch a glimpse of a few pandas at the zoo. Our trip now took us towards Shanghai, stopping to visit Guilin, a rural community. We noticed people washing their clothes in the river. Then we toured a small farm and noticed how poor the people were. We saw water buffalo and people tending their rice paddy. In the evening, we were treated to an amazing firework display on the lake in the mountains. These mountains are unique in their rounded shape, called Karst Mountains, having been formed from limestone. Shanghai is the largest city in China, population 23 million in the smallest area. The old part is on one side of the bay, while the modern is on the other side. Their skyscrapers include the Oriental Pearl, which is similar to the CN Tower. We had no idea what their crowds were like until we headed to the market, literally wall-to-wall people. It was interesting that several children wanted their picture taken with the lady with white hair, not a common sight. Lunches usually took place in factories we were touring. We found the food was fine, but always the same. One exception for dessert was the cake delivered to our table by the star of a performance we were attending. It was my birthday, so we all enjoyed a welcome, tasty dessert, different from the watermelon always served at every meal. We visited a tea plantation, and inside the building the guide asked us to sit. She laughed at us as we all sat on the tables rather than the even lower benches behind. Transportation in China takes many forms. We arrived by plane, transferred to very modern trains, took journeys by bus, and saw locals on motorbikes, some carrying up to 5 people, cars, trucks, rickshaws, and also on foot. We came across this bridal party. Because of Americanization, the custom of wearing red as a bride is changing. The middle woman is the bride. Also notice the street sweeper and his broom. The final leg of our tour took us to Hong Kong. It is a very modern city with subways, towering office buildings, and hotels. Ours was a beautiful hotel, and our suite overlooked the harbor from the 59th floor. We ate at this famous Jumbo Kingdom floating restaurant in the harbor. We're very glad we visited China and Hong Kong. The trip was very enlightening and educational. We're also glad we went before the mainland clamped down on Hong Kong's freedoms. It really opened our eyes to the diversity of wealth and poverty.
Thank you for accompanying us on our China trip again. It was fun to recount our enjoyable visit. But coming up next, you'll also have fun following Judy and Jim Zarubik on their trip to Hawaii. It's on our travel bucket list, so let's sit back and fly to Hawaii.
Jim and I were invited to our niece's wedding in 2005. How could we turn down an invitation to Maui in December? Our only worry was if we would be able to get out of Kincardine in order to catch our flight. We flew from Toronto, changed planes in Chicago, and after many, many hours in the air, we landed at the Kahului Airport, seen here at the tip of the dark blue arrow. Then we rented a car and drove to where the blue thunderbolt is on the map of our vacation rental in Kapalua. It turned out that the vacation rental backed onto one of the many golf courses in Maui. From the upstairs balcony, we could see the ocean as well as the golfers going by. Shortly after arriving, we walked in the ocean and then drove around the area, checking out the cliffs. Barry is standing halfway down the rock face. That was as close as you could get to the water. It was spectacular. We stopped at the side of the road where we saw other cars parked and went to investigate. The trees had very long rope-like branches hanging from them. Barry had a hold of one. At the end of the path was a small bay where many of the locals were snorkeling. Unfortunately, we did not have the equipment to join them. The wedding took place on the 19th hole of another golf course. This course hosts the PGA for the Mercedes Championships. The wedding was conducted by a minister in a traditional Hawaiian outfit, but there was also a part of Kincardine there as well. The bride's uncle came in a traditional Scottish outfit, which was not the best choice for such a warm climate, but his bagpipes rang loud and clear. Not many people were on our beach as it was the off-season. If you look under the clouds, you can just see the island of Molokai peeking through. The next day, the whole bridal party, including the bride and groom, went snorkeling. We stopped at the Malakini crater to snorkel and snuba. Those who signed up to snuba were attached to a tank on the boat, which allowed them to stay underwater if they wished, a combination of scuba and snorkeling. The marine life was beautiful and abundant, with brilliant colors. The water was crystal clear. The fish did not seem to be bothered by us at all. You could get up really close to them. This reef shark was not one anyone wanted to get close to, but seeing the reef shark did not keep us out of the water. We then took surfing lessons. Well, Jim said he would sacrifice the opportunity in order to stay on the beach and take the pictures. He did manage to get a picture of me kneeling, but missed the brief time I managed to stand up because he said he was laughing too hard to actually take a picture. That night we went to a luau where they roasted a pig in a big pit and entertained us with some traditional dancing and music. Our next excursion was to the West Maui Forest Reserve. There were many trails through the forest to explore, and there was a good vantage point to take some pictures from. You could get pictures of lots of lush plants, and there were 4 streams of waters in the area to water those plants. The water from the streams was extremely cold. I was the only one brave enough to go in from our group. The I'au Needle is left over from a volcano. It is 2,250 feet high. Its traditional name is Kakaimuku and is known as the phallic stone of Kanaloa, the Hawaiian god of the ocean, and it was used as an altar. But during the times of war, the peak was also used by the Hawaiians as a lookout by their warriors. The next day we went to the Hali Akala Crater National Park. We began the long drive up the side of the mountain. It takes 28 minutes from the time you enter the park at the bottom of the mountain until you reach the top. The drive is a series of switchbacks with little or no guardrails. It was very scary. You pass through the clouds, and then you leave the clouds far behind. And finally you reach the summit of 10,023 feet. Notice the coat. It wasn't warm at the top. You are able not only to look inside the crater, there are tours you can take inside, but we didn't have time. You can take a hike inside the crater, but because of the height, the air is very thin, so you need to be very fit. There are cabins for those who want to camp overnight in the crater. It will go below freezing at night, so warm clothing is a must. It was very desolate looking. At the peak is the observatory, but it's off limits to tourists. You can't see the dome in the picture. It doesn't show up against the sky. These plants are called a haina or silver sword. They are a member of the sunflower family. They only grow on the volcano above the 6,500-foot level, and they have a flowering stalk that grows 4 to 6 feet high. In the 1920s, they were almost extinct, but due to good management, they're now flourishing. On our way down from the crater, we had to find a spot to pull over to let the brakes of the car cool off. You could smell them overheating. Whale watching was our next adventure. We managed to see 2 whales, even though it wasn't whale watching season. On our way back to the harbor after seeing the whales, we encountered some sea turtles traveling alongside of the boat. Later that day, we left Maui and began the long 12-hour trip home. We'd like to go back to Maui to enjoy the many sights that we were unable to see on our short trip in 2005.
I hope you enjoyed our presentation on Maui as much as we did putting it together. And now Jim and I are looking forward to Rad and Deb Mickelson's presentation on Paris. Sit back and enjoy.
This presentation is on our trip to Paris in 2009. Paris really needs no introduction when you begin with a picture like this. The tallest structure in the city, the Eiffel Tower, is visible from almost anywhere. It's one of the most recognizable structures in the world. Our favorite view is from across the River Seine. If you ever get to Paris, don't miss the views of the city from the top. It's also lit up at night, which offers a whole new enjoyment of this landmark. Another familiar attraction is the Louvre, the most visited museum in the world. The new entrance pyramid was commissioned in 1984. Built in the 12th century, the Louvre was the primary residence of French kings from 1564 until 1682, when Louis XIV moved the royal residences to Versailles. It became the display place for the royal sculptures and art collection, and today displays about 35,000 works of art. It is home to the Mona Lisa by Da Vinci, the Venus de Milo, as well as the Fortune Teller by Caravaggio, one of my favorite artists. Outside the Louvre stands the Arc de Triomphe du Carousel, built to commemorate Napoleon's military victories. Note the Eiffel Tower in the background. The horses atop the monument were captured in 1798 by Napoleon following the defeat of Venice. The originals were returned a few years later. These are copies. If you look through the arch, you can see all the way to the larger Arc de Triomphe, with an obelisk in between. We decided to walk to that other arch. It's quite a bit further than it looks. The walk passes through the Twillery's garden, once the Royal Palace Gardens. The gardens are huge, with statuary all over the place, including some modern silver heads, part of a temporary exhibition. The vegetation is lush, and there's lots of it. Debbie took a break at the garden water feature, with the obelisk in the Place de la Concorde visible across the pond. As we passed the obelisk, a gift from Egypt in the 1800s, the Eiffel Tower was visible again. In the center of the huge traffic circle stood the arch. To get to it, you have to use a pedestrian tunnel under the roadway. We walked across the river to Napoleon's tomb under the dome ahead. Napoleon's sarcophagus, made of brown marble, sits in the rotunda under the dome, visible from above and below. A gilded altar stands nearby. Outside, houseboats are permanently moored to the riverbanks. On the way back to our apartment, we took a side trip to the Musée Rodin, where many of the master's works are on display. The thinker ponders the state of the world in the front yard, while many other fascinating works await in the gardens. Further on, we passed the Musée d'Orsay, Paris's major impressionist art gallery. It is installed in the former Orsay railway station. The station itself could be seen as the first work of art in the place, which features art from the period 1848 to 1914. The huge gilded wall clock at the end of the old station is itself a major artwork. And close up, many larger-than-life sculptures seem somehow more proportional to the space. Impressionist masters abound in this museum's collection, like Van Gogh's self-portrait, and his Starry Night masterpiece, and the famous work The Gleaners, and countless other notable works from the period. It took us 2 trips to the museum to begin to do it justice. Back by the river, we're struck by its beauty and that of the many bridges in this part of the city, but we're focused on getting to the 2 towers just visible over the bridge and under the arrow. Those 2 towers belong to none other than Notre Dame Cathedral. Outside as well as inside, it is stunning. The rear view of the cathedral highlights its use of the rib vault and the flying buttress architecture in its pioneering construction. This picture is of the south facade and nave with its rose stained glass window. Fire destroyed the roof and the fletch in 2019. The windows, like this one, dating back to the 13th century, did not suffer catastrophic damage in the fire. Repairs are scheduled to be completed in 2024. Nearby, the oldest surviving church in the city, Saint-Julien-de-Poivre, serves as a local concert venue. Les Deux Majots, a rendezvous in the Latin Quarter, was a gathering place for Ernest Hemingway, Jean-Paul Sartre, and other intellectuals and artists of their day. There is beauty everywhere in Paris. Sidewalk respites abound, all serving refreshments. Even the subway entrances are artistically presented. This one is in Montmartre. But in Paris, like back in Canada, there's no place like home, with a good book on the balcony. There's a lot more to Paris than we've been able to show you today. Maybe next time. Oh, and beaucoup apologies for any unintentional butchering of La Belle Française. Au revoir.
Well, that was fun, reminiscing about Paris.
I love Paris. I can't wait to go back. But you are going to go to Copenhagen, where you're going to catch up with Shirley Marie and Ron Harris as they board their cruise ship to follow the Viking Trail from Copenhagen to New York City. It's going to be a lot of fun. Enjoy. Bon voyage.
Au revoir.
We left Copenhagen on the Holland-America ship Eurodam. Bergen, Norway was our first port of call. The Mount Florin funicular runs from the city center to the top of the mountain. Locals can get off at their street on the mountain side. We departed Bergen to cross the North Sea to the Shetland Islands, composed of 100 small islands, 15 inhabited, and you're never more than 3 miles from the sea. Lots of stone houses, dry stone fences, and chimneys. Little dots in the distance are sheep. People make their living farming, fishing, and now with the gas industry. Jarlshof is a 4,000-year-old village discovered at the end of the 19th century when storms ripped open the low cliffs. Stone walls with no mortar. If you live in this village, here's the bank. The famous Shetland ponies stay outside year-round. On to the Faroe Islands, a self-governing region of Denmark. Rocky volcanic islands with a moderate climate. Some sod-roof buildings still used. Lots of fishing and some agriculture. This is a salmon fish farm. There are more sheep than people on the islands. This is a 900-year-old log house where we had snacks with the 5th-generation farmer and his wife in this village. Lots of steam from the hot springs. Their homes and pools have geothermal heating. Small summer cottages amid the scrubby landscape, many owned by unions. You can fish, hike, play golf 24 hours a day in the summer, not much snow in winter. The geyser erupts every 3 to 5 minutes, goes 30 feet high. This waterfall is 32 feet high, 100 feet wide. We're approaching Greenland on a beautiful day to go through this opening to the Prince William Sound Channel that runs east and west near the south end of Greenland. We'll see interesting icebergs, which are 90% under the waterline, and beautiful glaciers along the north side of the channel. This is the channel ahead of us. Lots of glaciers. 25 years ago, this glacier came to the water's edge. We need to squeeze by this iceberg in the channel. No dead end, just a sharp turn ahead. Notice the mountain peaks are changing. We're nearing another sharp bend where we will enter the fjord leading out to the ocean. This is the only village in the Sound, 130 people. They can only travel by boat or helicopter, but they have computers. 40 of our ship's staff are on a tender boat going to the village, bringing supplies they seldom get. For example, fresh vegetables, plus 40 fresh pizzas made on our ship. This is the view into their harbor. More of those sharp mountain peaks in this area. We're arriving in this town of 3,400 people at the end of the fjord on the west coast. The blue building's the hotel. No two towns in Greenland are connected by road. The local vendors were out to greet us. I'm standing beside a fish sculpture. In 1993, 18 sculptors were invited to come and create 24 rock sculptures in the town. What a wonderful adventure we've had.
On this trip, we experienced some beautiful scenes from nature. Too bad the clouds prevented us from seeing the Northern Light show, though. But now, let's go with Gord Dunbar on a different kind of holiday to Iona Abbey on the island of Iona in Scotland.
In 2014, as part of my sabbatical, I went to live for a week at the Iona Abbey community, the center of Celtic Christianity in Scotland. Our group arrived on Sunday afternoon around 4 o'clock. This is the jetty on the Isle of Mull, which is the last stop prior to a 10-minute ferry ride. Now, the ferry can only take 4 cars, but plenty of the passengers that needed to go were fine. Once on the Isle of Iona, we saw the Abbey. Now, the green van in the foreground transports the luggage for all the guests. My residence for the week was the MacLeod Center, named after one of the leaders who restored the Abbey over 100 years ago. Once settled in, we were fed supper in the dining hall. We were required to assist with food preparation, serving the food, washing the dishes, and cleaning the residence, working with the volunteers who are affectionately called volleys. This is the courtyard surrounded by the dining hall on one side and the residence dormitory wing on the other. In the mornings, I would sip a coffee while sitting on one of the benches. The view was peaceful, but it didn't go far. The view, however, was out of my dorm room window, revealing the highest point of land on the entire island. Once our supper dishes were washed and put away, we were invited to chapel for the nightly 7 o'clock service. A large Celtic cross pointed the way to the Abbey Chapel. Called the High Cross, it is engraved with Celtic runes carved over 1,300 years ago. The interior of the chapel as you enter is unheated, of course. The western transept is reconfigured on Tuesday nights for the service for prayers for healing. They place 12 cushions for people to kneel, while 3 people are stationed inside the circle to lay on hands. This is the same service I have, with permission, used here in Kincardine every other month. On the last night of our week's stay, the chapel is set for communion. The creed that they recite during the service is the one from the United Church of Canada. The eastern transept is where the pianist plays behind the pulpit, although other musicians play upstairs. Coordinating their playing becomes quite a challenge. The chancel of the chapel centers on the communion table, which is topped with marble quarried on the island itself. Marble helps to keep the communion elements naturally cool. Between the congregation and the communion table is the choir, seated traditionally with each half of the choir facing the other. Tucked near the entry to the chapel is the quiet corner, similar to how we use our chapel in Kincardine. If you pass through the quiet room, you enter the cloister walk surrounding the courtyard for the abbey residences where monks used to live. Further into the abbey is the dining room where tea and oat cakes were served after every evening's worship service. Outside of the abbey is a garden where monks once grew their food. Indeed, the abbey volleys still grow food there to augment meals. Outside the stone fence around the abbey, a few hotels have sprung up to accommodate tourists who do not live at the abbey. The population of the Isle of Iona hovers around 100 souls who either work as farmers or in the tourist trade. This is the burial mound carved into the island's stone where many ancient Celtic leaders are buried. Because the island is so small, wells have been laboriously chiseled out of the rock, but fenced for safety. This odd sculpture is meant to symbolize Jesus falling on his walk to Golgotha with the too-heavy cross on his back. It marks the beginning of a 7-hour pilgrimage I walked. After the fall on Jesus, we came to the ruin of the convent. Our guide told us that Celtic pilgrimages are about moving as one in community, helping each other along the way as we deepened our inner spiritual journey. We traveled in the drizzle to the west, and the direction of the arrow points to the next landmass, Newfoundland. Sheep grazed everywhere due to the rocky soil. The trail was rocky, boggy, and treacherous. Most of us wore wellies, rubber boots, to keep our feet dry. 2 hours in, we arrived at the old marble quarry from where the communion tabletop was harvested. In fact, the old quarrying machinery had just been abandoned to rot and rust. On the other side of the machinery, the ocean beckoned. After climbing down a cliff, we picked up a stone from the beach and were invited to pray over it, throwing it into the ocean like an amen. This tiny lake is the single reservoir providing fresh water for the entire island. While I was there, we had to ration our water use due to scarcity. Believe it or not, there is a 9-hole golf course that doubles as pasture land. Notice the cattle. When the Celtic settlement was first established by St. Columba, monks were encouraged to go onto the land to pray. Here's a monk's cell, so you can see how crude and how exposed such spaces were. I hope you've gotten a wee taste of what it was like. When it was time to leave, the entire staff, with all the helpful volleys, gathered at the jetty to bid us farewell. In fact, if you look at this fuzzy close-up, they gave us a collective wave as we were leaving. That wave was followed by a chorus line of high kicks, accompanied with lots of laughter and spirited hilarity. I enjoyed myself so much that I hope the journey back there to live for another week during my sabbatical this fall. It was certainly a time of spiritual deepening. I hope that the pandemic will allow a return visit. Thanks for coming with me. Remember the song by the 5-man electric band? The chorus goes like this: Sign, sign, everywhere a sign, blocking out the scenery, breaking my mind. Do this, don't do that, can't you read the sign? When Rod and Mary Coates toured southern France, signs were very much something they noticed that enriched their trip.
This is a series of photos and a little bit of a story about a trip we took to southern France in 2014. And shortly after the trip began, it became obvious that signs were going to become a theme for the trip. And you'll see why in a moment. We flew directly from Toronto to Bordeaux and arrived at our accommodation late in the day. So we took a stroll around town, and the downtown core, as you can see, has a lot of pedestrians, and you'll see these electric trams almost everywhere through the downtown core. They're very quiet, so you have to watch out and listen very carefully. In the same plaza, the Grand Théâtre, a beautiful theater that you can appreciate even more so at night. The next morning, our first full day in Bordeaux, we decided to take a stroll down the main pedestrian street, Rue Sainte-Catherine, and this sign caught my eye. Probably should have tipped me off that we were about to see some peculiar things. One of the things you'll notice in France, and this is in a lot of businesses and especially in restaurants, you will see people taking their dogs absolutely everywhere. So this is one of the first signs that caught our attention in a clothing store, and the t-shirt in the window said, "J'ai Facebooké ta mère," which means I Facebooked your mother. A few more shops down the road, another women's clothing store, Les Sisterettes. More examples of franglais. Another store, another sign. Likez la page Yumi sur Facebook. Like us on Facebook. Facebook strikes once again, as does franglais. Another store poster. Adopt un look, which I think is a really good idea, but perhaps not the best outfit to wear with a motorbike. More good advice. Shoppez online, especially appropriate during these pandemic times. This is a particularly useful sign. It's at the boardwalk by the waterfront for the River Garonne, and it's very practical. What tourist wouldn't want to know the location of the toilets, including a breakout by automated, barrier-free, securely locked ones, and also urinals. Looking on the ground isn't always the most obvious place to see signs, but in this case, because Bordeaux is the starting point of one of the many routes of the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, the scallop shell is embedded in the paving stones in a number of locations in the city, and it points the direction for pilgrims to take for the route to Santiago. After a couple of days in Bordeaux, we drove east through the Dordogne department, and we stopped for a short visit at the medieval town of Sarlat. Sarlat has essentially remained unchanged since medieval times, so it's extremely representative of what 14th century France looked like. The town of Sarlat grew around a Benedictine monastery of the 11th century, and that eventually evolved into the cathedral which you see before you. On a side street, we saw this particular sign, which says, "Restaurant servers have had enough cleaning the urinations of those who relieve themselves in the street." So clearly they needed a toilet location sign like we saw in Bordeaux. At the end of our first day's travel, we ended up at a guest house at the little town of Sauliac-sur-Salé. Le Salé is the name of the river that the community is named after, and that was our base for the following week. The large blue line that you see in the middle of the map is the Dordogne, and both those rivers are pilgrim routes, and we did encounter pilgrims that were walking the Camino to Santiago. Near our guest house was the Grotte du Pechmerle, which is a tourable underground prehistoric cave with sketches on the wall dating back 25 to 30,000 years, similar to what you see at the more famous location of Lascaux. And it's a good example of good record keeping. Doesn't seem to matter where you go, there are tourists always getting into your photos. I have hundreds more photos and dozens of stories I could tell you, but just in the interest of time and closure, we took a high-speed train from Bordeaux to Paris and spent a couple of days there before flying home to Toronto. Notre Dame had a fire sale shortly after we left, but unfortunately we missed it. Here are a couple of photos of the Pandesal bridge in Paris. The locks are symbols that couples have left by writing their names on them and securing to the bridge. It's a tradition that's gone on for a long, long time. At the time we were there, there was some structural damage to the bridge. You can see the signs that were put up to try to prevent and discourage people from putting the locks on. And shortly after we left, they started removing the 93 tons worth of padlocks to prevent further structural damage to the bridge. Difficult to visit Paris without having a look at the Eiffel Tower, and this sign in English at the base of the tower is pretty darn good advice. For your own safety, please do not buy anything from the street vendors. And that's good advice because what the sidewalk vendors sell is pretty awful stuff.
Of course, any presentation from Rod Coates is going to finish with a pun. That was great. I hope you have enjoyed tonight. I pray that you feel refreshed by our shared travels and that you will enjoy the rest of your night with a smile. Once again, if you decide you wish to make an extra donation to Kincardine United Church's ministry, the best way is to go to our website and look for the donate icons on the left side panel of the web page. Just mark your donation around the world. As we depart from this digital space, cherishing the shared travel images which took us out of Kincardine, let's finish this presentation with the serene beauty of the Irish gardens Terry Boyd and Joseph Dunlop Adley visited in their travels. Good night.
Have a good night, everybody.
Cheers.